And as was said by Lorenzo Macciali, we give the floor to Andrea Laguardia, Director of LEGACOOP SERVIZI, PRODUZIONE and SERVIZI. Thank you so much. Good afternoon, everybody. And I, too, just like Lorenzo, I'd like to thank Isa Pulire for the opportunity extended to us. And I'd like to tell you that this is the most important event in the sector. It's one of those very few moments when the market meets and speaks about interesting things. We have very few of such opportunities, and I believe that this initiative should go on, and associations should invest more in such events also through their own bilateral bodies. And I'd like at this point for my speech to go back to what we heard this morning, the theme of memory, because I believe that memory has to do with the service sector as well. And this morning, something was not mentioned, and Lorenzo said before, and I'd like to thank him for mentioning our meeting, also in the best speeches of physicians as well, delivered by speakers. And they forgot to mention, apart from physicians and nurses, they forgot to mention our workers in the special moments of the pandemic. They waged the same war. Back then, Pancani couldn't see the smiles of operators because they were wearing uniforms, goggles, and masks, just like nurses. And we also had an ex-date back then when scientists explained to us that the virus stays on surfaces, if I remember well, for 9 hours. And in a normal period with normal viruses, nothing happens. But during the pandemic, the presence of that virus on surfaces is equal to a disaster. And so back then, a beacon was appeared in terms of the importance of professional cleaning, and in the safety protocols mentioned by Chisle, Secretary, in the first position to restart all working activities, you had sanitization and cleaning of the environments, ranging first. And back then, and it's no chance that Tony and Andrea identified this theme of the memory. And we wondered back then, will somebody remember what is happening right now? And will somebody remember what we're doing? And unfortunately, in this period, I would tend to say no, because we have wearing signs, and memory has been lost about what happened. And what happened back then? It happened that public spending for such services increased because they couldn't do without it, and also public spending increased, and also the award of tenders through the integration of already existing contracts. There was no time to be wasted with tenders, and we had to act immediately. This meant more work for enterprises, more work for people, and also stabilization of staff in some cases. In some cases, we could go from part-time to full-time contracts. And something else happened on the market. We had enterprises that improvised their functions. Everybody applied for sanitizing activities from a certain moment onwards. We understood that not all companies could do that job, but that job could be performed just by qualified companies with highly trained staff for that assignment. But the most important thing that happened was that cleaning and sanitizing should not have been considered as a commodity, as a marginal service, but cleaning and sanitization should have been part of the organizational processes of the places where we operate. I'm thinking first and foremost of hospitals, where sanitizing is not secondary element, and Professor Ricciardi explained it yesterday about infections, healthcare infections, an integrated process. And then something occurred, and nobody would have been able to envisage it during the pandemic. When they decided to close schools, there was the most important insourcing process. 6,000 workers went from the outsourcing system to an insourcing system. Employees of the state, the reopening of schools, principals, all of a sudden, in the chaos surrounding us, they had to organize also that type of work. And they chose the simplest thing they could do: open the windows. The only way to send away the virus persisting on surfaces was simply by opening the windows. We could have provided professional services to clean surfaces, but the public administration couldn't do it. So, which are the lessons of that period today? Very little has remained, and the sector is not again in the limelight. How do we measure it? Public spending and tenders, for example, and with the lowest possible offer, and through a strange algorithm, and so you have tenders based on the lowest possible offer, and this also involves trade union conflicts. When we could increase the number of jobs, today, however, we cannot bear it any longer. So all of this in a period where we live an endless emergency. We went from the pandemic and gas price spikes, and now raw materials, and it also affects our sector. You know it. I'd like to say it again. The service sector, and Lorenzo gave us numbers, very interesting numbers before, to make you understand the value of this sector. It's the only sector in Italy that does not receive any auditing of costs, and the public administration asks us to carry out essential services for the country in hospitals, schools, cities, and so on and so forth. But in the case costs increase, costs that are the object of the contract, such costs are not paid to us. And today, service sectors are bearing their costs with their own money, whether we act on the system or the system explodes, because companies cannot bear the price increases you have at the moment in the sector of jobs. Well, you have something standard envisaged by the tender code, and tomorrow we have the draft prepared by the State Council and with the proxy of the government on the new code of tenders, and so tomorrow something might positively or negatively change the present context, and we asked a price review for the service sector, reading the draft, and probably we will have it, and we will have separation in the tenders, cost of labor and quality of the enterprise. Probably we will have positive novelties for the sector, and but this will start with the implementation of the new tender code, but we need an emergency rule now, and to have an emergency rule, we need a government, irrespective of the leaning of the government. Well, we'd like a government to be organized as soon as possible. We cannot wait. We cannot have political bickering, and we have to curb price increases, first priority, and then we have to include price review for the service sector, because otherwise essential services are stopped, and then try and introduce something that is something smart. You have value purchase procurement, the value attached to the service put on the market is not exclusively connected to the purchase of the public administration, but it can be connected to the efficiency I may want to introduce. And I'd like to give you a very simple example. If hospital infections are a disaster, just like Professor Ricciardi told us yesterday, it means that we have to invest more in the sector of sanitizing, whereby that percentage decreases. If this concept is introduced inside tenders and I have to introduce my service, I have to guarantee that the effect of my cleaning is in line with what is requested. It means establishing a dialogue, consulting the market before tenders. And I'd like to end, because perhaps I've used up my time, and Lorenzo was very good in sticking to the time schedule, and I should be as well. And I'd like to end by telling you that with great anxiety, we wait for the establishment of the new government, and what we'll do together with other trade associations and trade unions. Would like to immediately meet the government for price reviews, and to have that beacon that we had during the pandemic that attached us the right importance. Thank you so much.
This is a further presentation that makes us understand what's going on, because when we say that the pandemic sort of was a sort of watershed, but this is not fully true, given what you said about the idea of setting higher expenses, for instance, industrial laundry service related to hospitals, healthcare, but there too there is a problem of prices that are not aligned with the increase in energy prices.
Con la pandemia.
And this is a problem because with the pandemic, the worst period of the pandemic, we resorted to extraordinary measures, but nowadays we forgot of how this is important. This is no longer a commodity, you said, but when you have to take stock of what you said, it went back being a commodity. And also, I'd like to report a piece of news that I'm reading now from the EU sources speaking about tomorrow's summit. We come to know that the gas price cap could be useless if the price of gas keeps going down. So some announcements were sort of enough to make the price go down. And Europe, who is trying to adopt measures to fight price increases, is telling us that it might not be helpful because the price is going down by itself.